See.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well, and yourself?
I see you got your tree in your background.
I do have one of them there.
I'm gonna get you one of those lights because you're a little bit dark.
I have one coming tomorrow.
Oh, really? I was gonna get one for Christmas.
Oh, you can get this one. Let me see what I can do about the lighting.
Okay.
Let me try. Maybe I can light the tree. Let's see.
Just a little bit better. It's warmer. Yeah.
It's a little warmer.
Yeah.
I'm trying to size the screen. Are you seeing only part of my face?
I'm seeing all your face. I'm seeing part of mine. I don't know how to do that, but I'm not gonna worry about it.
Same here, because I can see all of yours, so we're good.
Okay, good. Cool. We have a very interesting topic tonight.
This is going to be interesting. Can't wait to get into it. I hope our audience is ready.
Well, what's interesting about this, as they're still trying to sign on, is that what we find that what should be interesting to our audience. I guess Christmas and all these other things are popping up, and are being busy. But the good thing about it is that we're recording these, and they can actually be seen at our website. So
Yes.
It's not any effort lost on this.
Absolutely. Good point. Very good point. Can always log back in. I do see
Right.
some new faces tonight, or new names.
So how's the weather down in South Florida?
It was an absolutely beautiful day.
Mm-hmm.
It was cool, but sunny.
Yeah, but here in Atlanta, of course, here in Atlanta, it is cold and somewhat damp. But you will have sunshine in the daytime, of course, sunny, but it's always in the 40s. So we're experiencing some cold here, and everybody's, of course, lighting their fireplaces. So I thought about doing it, but it's too much work.
That's the wonderful thing about, being somewhere where it does get colder. You can do your
Mm-hmm.
fireplace. I think we were in the 60s today, and honestly, it just, like I said, felt great.
Yeah.
Weather.
Yeah, I think we're going to get started because I want to make sure that we start on time, and sort of like church, we don't want to wait till members get there to start. We want to start training our viewers to actually be there when we get started, because there are some people who've been waiting. But good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Willie Miles. I am the president of Dr. Willie Miles Children Foundation, located here in Atlanta, Georgia. Jackie?
Good evening, everyone. I am Jacqueline Hampton Clemens, educator and community educator, activist.
Okay. And she's part of our team. I'm just really happy to have Jackie on with us. She's been with us for almost about 2 months now, maybe longer, co-hosting these live streams with me. And I just want to share with her, I really appreciate her efforts and her research and making sure these topics are interesting to our audience, and also that they're really reality-based. One of the goals of the foundation is to make children our priority. One of our goals is also to make sure that we're dealing with information that is relevant to the community when it comes to addressing those issues. So you're going to find that every topic we have is going to be relevant to children,
Mm-hmm.
However, sometimes you think, why are you talking about that? We're going to always have a pinpoint that says how it affects children.
Right.
But before we get into tonight's topic, I want to make you all aware of several things. That for the next 2 weeks, we'll have 2 more live streams, I think before the end of the year, and they're all going to be dealing with race and how children interpret that kind of information. Christmas is coming up, and just keep people reminded that there are a whole lot of folk who just don't have a whole lot, and it looks kind of grim for a lot of folk. But I do want to share the gifts and the trees are not what Christmas is all about. The life that we have is really about what Christmas is all about, and sharing and being compassionate and having empathy for our fellow human beings is what Christmas is all about.
Absolutely.
So I want to keep us focused on that. Also, Jackie and I sort of like caucus last week. She was in Florida, I'm here in Atlanta. We're both watching the news. Our plan was to actually give out community mini grants in January, until we saw the long lines for the need for food. And she and I started talking, saying, what can we do to address this immediate need in the community? And this is what we came up with. We thought it would be foolish of us to wait until January to fund community projects, and to have our young people do videos of YouTube when people are hungry. So we decided to administer $50 and $100 gift cards for anyone who really needs it. Now, let me share this with you. These funds have come to us based upon the kindness of our donors. I want to share that there are many people who are getting benefits. There are many people who are getting, Jackie, the food stamps. They're getting, some getting the rent paid. They're getting the child support.
Getting the stimulus unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So we came with this thing that we want to make sure that this money gets into the hands of people who really need it. So if you know of a person in your area who could use $50 or $100 before January 25th, and I would say, Jackie, when would the deadline be, you think?
Honestly, I would say as soon as possible. I think, our intent was to even try to give it out before the end of this month, but of course we're a week into it. So let's say January 30th.
No, I'm speaking up for the money for the holidays.
Oh, for letting us know. Okay, then
well, it should be the deadline.
Let's try to do it by the 20th. So
yeah,
let's do it to them.
Because we have to actually mail those. If you're out of Atlanta, if you're outside of Florida, we have to actually mail those gift certificates to you. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to say I agree by the 20th.
20th.
And we don't have a whole lot of money, but we have enough for about $1,000 worth of giveaways. So get it done very quickly. When it's all gone, it's gone. How do you ask for this dollars? How do you ask for these gift cards? Please email us at info@thechildrensfoundation.net and just give us a brief synopsis of your story. I don't need a whole lot. That the card will be used for food, they'll be used for gift for children. And we really appreciate. I was going to
say, Dr. Miles, that was the one requirement that you had. There must be children in the home.
There must be children in the home. So it's for food and it's for toys. Again, we're going to administer it in the values of $50 and $100. And of course, we'll administer it until, Jackie, all the money is gone.
Yes. And also you might want to mention to them, which you kind of said indirectly, is that we're reaching out to families, across the country. So they don't have to be in South Florida and or Georgia. Mm-hmm. If you know some families somewhere else and you're one of our regular listeners, we'd like to support.
Well, Jackie, you don't have to say, you may want to say it because you're saying it. So just say it. We're out here co-hosting together. Don't say I want to say it. But the point is that let's get these dollars out there. And if you know of folk who want to match that, please let us know. That's where the dollars are going. So you have no question about where our heart is. And I like this, Jackie, because we have the option to administer this the way we want to. There's no red tape. There's no talking about qualifying. The only qualification is that you have a need. You have a need. Right. All right. So again, I think Jackie said the 20th, but I'm going to agree with her. But I think we should get them in as soon as possible, because as soon as you make the request and Jackie takes a look at these things, we're going to start sending those gift cards out to folk. All right.
Absolutely.
So I'm looking forward to this. Again, if you know of families in need across the state, whoever our followers are, we're going to be administering or giving out. And Jackie, I'm using the wrong words, administering, because I'm a government worker.
Whatever it is, it means we're giving it out, and that works. I think our audience knows exactly what you're saying.
Getting out in the value of $50 and $100 to make sure that families who really need these funds get those funds. And I think this is a great time, Jackie, for us to make an appeal.
Yes, absolutely. It is. So this is also a wonderful time, again, to consider where your dollars go. We did have some media material that went out. Actually, I think from one of our board members talking about, making sure that you're planting seeds under trees that, you're going to be able to participate in or enjoy. And I think that was a very beautiful message that went out. But guys, this is a great time to support giving, because we do want you to understand you're not giving to us, you're giving to the community. So it's a great way to extend the message about education, about caring. And again, your dollars go directly to those in need. So we hope that you'll put that effort in there.
You know what's so amazing about us, and I'm not like tooting our own horns, but let's just take a moment to do this. We are a new organization, and we've done so much without being inhibited. You know what I'm saying? Like, for instance, we fed the frontline workers. We bought their meals for them. We are a new organization with no government funding, people. No government funding.
And I want the audience to know that that is your intent. The intent is to cut back on red tape. If any of you are in this work, you know that grants are, you know, very laborious, just tons and tons of paperwork and administration. And we wanted this to be simple. This is really about helping in the simplest way.
And the money's getting out quickly where the money is needed. You know, thank goodness we're not part of Congress, because people would be starving waiting on us, wouldn't they?
Yeah, they're waiting on that for a minute.
So this is the benefit of having a grassroots foundation, depending upon those who give to us, because we're giving right back to you. Right back to you. And folks, guess what? After the people receive these we small amount of dollars, we say small, to some people $50 is a whole lot. If you ain't got nothing,
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because what we're saying is, let's say you have a single mother, she has one child. Okay, that $50 can go far for getting that child some toys that maybe she couldn't otherwise get them. So we know that it's just and you bring us those families and those people in need.
okay, I think they got it. So as soon as you can, send us an email at info@thechildrensfoundation.net. And Jack, again, I think some people send us emails, they forget to put the S in foundations, and in children's. It's the children's S foundation.net. We look forward to start getting those. And Jackie, let's start looking tomorrow so we're getting any requests in, so we can get those dollars out to the community.
As soon as we get them in, get them out. Yes.
Okay, great. Now, I know you're waiting. I know I am also. To talk about this topic of racism and
Black humanity.
Yeah, Jackie and I were talking about this. I mention Jackie often because she's the one who's really the impetus behind a lot of this, and I'm just the person who just grabs it on and start working with her. But the whole goal is to make sure we address this issue of race and how it affects our children. And for the next 3 weeks, we'll be addressing the issue of race. But Jackie, before we dive into it, let's talk about the state of our condition of race right now in America.
Which, again, is why these topics come up, Dr. Miles. I really think that there are people who believe that, you know, racism is a mute term, like it has no meaning, it has no significance in America anymore. And of course, we heard people talk about a post-racial America, which we know doesn't exist. But Dr. Miles, I want to say that you pointed out something very important. It's important for us to define racism. Okay. When you say, you know, let's talk about where we are, it's for us, and maybe many people like us, it is so obvious. You know, when you have one president who couldn't nominate a Supreme Court justice in 9 months, and another one who could do it in less than 40 days, that's racism. You know, when you see our schools based on zip codes always having different outcomes and perhaps different services, that's racism. And so one of the things that's going to come up is that it's so ingrained that maybe we don't recognize it anymore.
And we'll actually talk about what racism really is. You know, what is it? And I really want to focus on our similarities. And you know, do we have a greater similarities than difference? And how do we define this thing of race? Where did it come from? And our goal is to make sure that we help our community get a greater understanding of it, so that we can become more intelligent about the issues at hand. Oftentimes, Jack, when we talk about racism, we think about black against white, and that's all that matters. Black folk don't like white folk, and white folk don't like black folk, and that's the extreme of it. But there's really much more to it than that.
A lot more.
And I simply just want to start us off, Jackie. We're talking about the idea of racism. It is relatively a new concept. It started about a few hundred years ago, and it does not account, when you talk about racism, it doesn't account for biological. Like, I'm talking about, like, you know, your genes, I'm talking about your red blood cells and all that. It really is talking about putting it in a category which becomes a societal category. Right. So racism,
it's a construct.
Yeah, right? Exactly. It's a construct.
It's been constructed, and therefore you just raised a point that I've actually never heard mentioned about racism. It really is not about your biology, because we get past that. We have people who are quote unquote biracial and multiracial and all of that, and you're still going to deal with racism.
Well, you know,
so good point.
But you know what's interesting, that the racism thing really is societal, and it does not meet the qualifications for human variations. And that, let me tell you what I'm talking about when I talk about human variations. The human variations are that we have different blood types. We have A, B, C, right? And O. Well, guess what? White people got A, B, C, and O also.
And black people
So,
have them, right?
and other people, well, human beings have it. So the whole point is that's a variation that race does not cover. And Jackie, I think that's part of the problem. I think people see race as, oh, we so different because we're black and white. Okay.
Well, that's the story that is used to justify racism, that there is a difference between us when we know that, in fact, there really is not. We know certainly biologically we all fall within the human race, but then the nature of racism is based on kind of denying people of color their humanity.
You know, sort of the word I want to throw out there too, and I want us to catch on for us, and that is the issue of human variation. So we're talking about racism or race being a, as you say, a cultural construct, but people have seen it not as a cultural construct, they view it as a biological construct.
Scientific construct, in fact.
So in other words,
that's what the propaganda typically different.
Yeah, your mic keep going. Your mic goes in and out. I'm not sure what's happening there.
I'm sorry about that.
That's quite all right. Okay. I have to make sure you're aware of it. But the problem is that people really want us to think that there's so much difference in us. The only difference in us is the outward coloration and hair color and so forth. And that's a human variation now. That's a human variation. And the biological variation is going to be our blood type, our genes, hereditary, and so forth. So Jackie, race, in other words, is sort of like a new term that people have coined to justify inferiority. Inferiority or superiority.
Right. And it was constructed, especially in this country, to serve a designated purpose of making one set of humans inferior to another set of humans.
Well, guess what? Even at one point, they meaning whoever they are, dealt with the science of it. Because you hear the thing about 1/3 of your blood being black or something, that you're black. I'm saying, wait a minute.
1/3, I think you
one drop or something. One drop, whatever.
Yeah, so meaning going back about 5 generations.
Yeah. So the whole point is that they made a societal construct into a biological construct, which is totally off.
Which ultimately became a social construct because, you know, they're not even pushing the biological or scientific aspects anymore. No. And let's face it, it's practiced as a social construct.
Of course. And with race is designed to delineate, really is, from inferiority, superiority. And so as we move
That's simple. Yes.
As we move this conversation along, I want to deal with, you know, Jackie, how do children learn about race? Like, where do they get this as adults? You know, where do they get this information from? Children.
Well, what's really interesting is I don't think people realize that children get things not so much from what you literally verbally say, but they're watching you from day one. You know, children receive major messages through your behaviors. You know, noticing that there's never been a person of color in their home. Or, you know, and that works both ways. So children get it from everywhere. And honestly, in this country, it's very difficult to, very, very difficult, in fact, to create an environment that's inclusive. And you have to do that intentionally because, again, society has a natural, well, the American society has a natural, a built-in system of racism that, again, I don't think we're even conscious of most of the time.
You know what's interesting about children, though, is we talk about where they get this information from. Parents oftentimes say, well, you know, we don't say that in our house. But the question is, what do you say outside the house? What do you say when you're driving? What do you say when you see people walking down the street who look different than you? Or somebody gets you very angry? Do you say that's a human being, or do you call them a name? And this has nothing to do with being black or white. We're talking about all people, because racism exists with all people. Right. And I think,
and what do you say about news stories?
Yeah. You know? What I like to do it for a moment here is to delineate between racism and prejudice, because I think we all have some, you know, prejudice. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily about people. We all discriminate. You know, we all decide whether or not we like chocolate or vanilla. We like cake or ice cream. You know, so those are discriminatory factors there. But I'm talking about what are the variations that teach, what are the things that teach our children that they shouldn't like a person because of the color of their skin? Or they shouldn't like a person because they live in a certain neighborhood? Or they shouldn't like a person because they go to a certain school?
Mm-hmm.
So,
And those things come up very early in kindergarten. In fact, probably in preschool, the separations began, and we talk often about the fact that children don't notice differences until they're taught those differences. So, societal, children grow up and they start learning colors, right? But then we add the, I guess, human element to
mhm.
color, and we teach them to notice a difference in color. And I think research says that a lot of young adults will tell you that while they learned some things early, it took them probably all the way to middle school to truly understand that the discrimination was intentional and that they were really being asked to dislike, another human being.
But what's amazing about this also is that when you start looking at how children learn, and you touched upon it a little bit, you talked about this early childhood thing. I think that parents miss a teaching opportunity when children start saying, guess what, mommy, why is Johnny's skin dark and mine is light?
Mm-hmm.
And people kind of shrug it off. And well, I'm not going to talk about that, versus using it as a teachable moment. A teachable moment. And the teachable moment should not be about what you've encountered, but it's about human respect.
Or Dr. Miles, what about teaching them to quote unquote ignore color?
Well, the thing about it, I just think that when children like, well, not just children, but people, when people like people and people are being treated humanely, they don't see color.
Mm-hmm.
They only see color when they've been mistreated.
Well, and that's a good conversation, Dr. Miles. Should we say they don't see the difference in the color?
Well, I'll share with you about myself, is that when I kind of like not judge people, but rate people on how they treat me. Are you with me? So if I'm comfortable around you, you may have blonde hair and blue eyes. I am aware that you have blonde hair and blue eyes, but guess what? When I'm interacting with you, I don't see color. I don't see, oh, you're a white person. Now, if something happens and I start saying, wait a minute, I wonder why did that occur? Is it because I'm black or they're white? Yeah. I began to look for reasons why people act the way they act. Right. So I think there's a lot of discussion on that, and it may be according to individuals. But what I teach folks is that when people are treated right, especially with children don't really see like color. They start discriminating after age 5. All right. So we're talking about
some of the research we have.
Okay. All right. Well, at this point, we talked about children, what they learn about race and when they learn it about race. Well, we know that, first of all, children are very impressionable, and we know that the early beginnings are critically important. Important. I think it's very important that not that we just teach race, but we teach children how to appreciate who they are, how they have to appreciate their skin color, their skin tone, their hair texture, their clothing, and so forth. So well, clothing has nothing to do with race. My point is building self-esteem. So when we teach self-acceptance, we won't allow our children to be put down because of differences. And I think the most important thing for me is to make sure that children have a healthy understanding of differences of race and that everyone is different. And, I actually had a discussion with some of the children that I'm treating who are biracial. And I talked about differences. And I said, well, guess what? It's kind of amazing. So why did God create us with all different fingerprints? I mean, why did God
want to be right?
Why did God make all of us with our bodies being a special print itself cannot be replicated until they start cloning? Are you with me? So he wanted to show that we are different. Not different to be inferior, but to be different that says you're so special because no one else has your body code. No one else has your body code. You're one of a kind, which makes you special. And it's those kind of things, I think, Jackie, that we should be teaching our children, looking at how we're more alike. But I think the discussion.
But the question is, are we?
Are we more alike?
Are we teaching this to our children?
Well, it's evidently we're not, because
and
we're
not
seeing
being deliberate about it.
Yeah, well, not only are we not teaching it, but I think you were hitting up on something recently. It's about institutionalization. This whole thing is institutionalized. So even though we're teaching it, guess what? Some of our children ain't feeling it.
Right.
An example. Okay, don't hate anybody because of color of skin. Don't dislike them because we're all the same. Well, mama, I go to the store, so why am I being treated differently? Why am I being looked at? And why does somebody want to check my bag when the person who was really stealing was walking out the store?
And Dr. Miles, that really does become a big issue as we talk about
Mm-hmm.
what children learn. We grow up trying to tell them that, especially in certain homes, you're taught that everyone is the same.
Mm-hmm.
But then you go out and experience something different. It's another way that they are taught. That happens early on. People should know that children can tell, even in a school environment, when one child is being treated differently than the other.
But do you really think, check this out, it's kind of interesting. I think, now, I can't say what all Black folk do because I can't talk for the Black community. But what I am saying is that, it's kind of difficult. And if we're actually honest, I think Black families teach their children a little bit differently. Like, for instance, my mother talked to me about what it was like to grow up in the deep South, the segregated South, and the cotton field South, and how white sharecroppers treated them,
Right.
and they taught us, that as long as you're Black, you got to always work harder. Well, why I got to work harder because I'm Black? Not work harder to get achievement, but because you're Black.
Mm-hmm.
And why is it I have to have all these pressures because I'm Black, but then you want to tell me we all alike?
Right. Because I was going to say, I also think that, and we do have a point here, research does say that children learn about race at home.
Mm-hmm.
We want to point that out. But there are many messages that go out. I know in our homes, we were taught, treat everyone the same. It's your character, the content of your character, not the color of your skin,
Mm-hmm.
and all these different things that, we come out into society with. But then you have another group that comes out into society and they never got that message. They didn't get that memo. In fact, they got a memo that said just the opposite. So it is about us teaching and practicing our similarities. I do believe that education can change the racial climate in our country, but we're just not there yet in terms of teaching our children.
What's interesting, when you start looking at the racial climate now, you would think that ain't nothing been taught. I mean, you really would. I mean, when you see the racial tension we have now, and I think it's always been there, it just, these situations have caused it to reveal itself. And I think just when we started thinking that we're making a lot of headway, and I'm not saying we have not, I'm simply saying that we got a long ways to go. And it's based upon race. Not based upon something I've done. You know what I'm saying?
Just the color of your skin.
Just the color of my skin.
But our society makes numerous exceptions. See, it really is about valuing. Do we value human life? Do we value the lives of those, and we do sometimes. We value certain lives. We value our NFL and our NBA players, and that's across the line, right? Because our children are taught that. Those same, households that may teach race as an issue of our skin tone, will revere certain public figures. Right. And things of that nature. So when we talk about what children are taught, all of these social factors and influences go into that. It's very difficult when you have young children and you're trying to teach not tolerance, but you're trying to talk about why you have to do certain things. Why is it that you have to work harder? Why is it that there's no guarantee that even your work will get you where you need to be at? Why is there the mindset that says that your education may not be any good for you, but it's better to have it? Where may not necessarily open the doors you needed to open because your parents can close them. In other words, why do we have to have the talk?
Yeah, it's just amazing. But guess what? And you ask the question, why is it we don't have to talk? We're talking about Black people. Well, white people don't have to have a talk. They don't have to have the talk about, you got to struggle, you got to work hard. Now,
but
again,
guess what? We also don't have to have a White History Month.
Right.
Because it's taught all the time.
Yeah, it's part of the institution. It's part of the institution. And the question is, if we're so tolerant, if we're so colorblind, if you will, why do these vestiges still exist? Why they still exist? Again, as we're talking, I just want to remind those who are logging on with us, the new ones. I'm Dr. Willie Miles from the Children's Foundation here in Atlanta, Georgia, and we have Jackie Hampton Clennis, who's out of Florida, who's a co-host with us, and we're talking about race. We're talking about race, not only about race, but we're talking about what is the color of racism, and are we more alike than differences, and how we teach our children, and what do we teach our children about this thing of race?
And Dr. Miles, should this be standardized? I mean, we have so many we have so many things that we standardize in our education system. Do you think this is something that should be standardized from kindergarten to 12th grade in terms of instructing?
But what's amazing, and I think we've had this discussion in our past live streams, and that is that who should, now if your question is, should we deal with racism and or discrimination as part of a structured system of getting information out, the answer is yes. But I think it still goes back to the homes. It goes back to who's the child's first teacher. I think it goes back to one's own frame of reference of what race is. And guess what? We all have differences and what we think of what race is. And we have the difference about what race is based upon our experiences.
But I think that's also why we have maintained this system of racism, because if it's only being taught in the home, there's very often limited knowledge. Okay. There are still individuals who, for the majority of their day life experiences, don't interact with very many members of other races and other cultures.
Yeah.
So if the education is only going to come out of their homes, then we're going to continue to get, because I will tell you, I'm one that always asks the question, how does an 18-year-old who clearly had no connection to Jim Crow, the time when we were slaves, how does that 18-year-old learn to hate? Why is an 18-year-old walking around with a Confederate flag? What does it mean to them? And where did they learn that? It's 100% learned.
One thing about it is that, again, we can have this discussion. It can go on forever about whether schools should or not. But, I'm one of those ones who don't kind of like trust schools too much when it comes to trying to teach our children. And I think we give too much to our schools to do. But I think what I'm hearing you say is that there should be a common race agenda, a common race curriculum that is used, that is, first of all, designed by a multidisciplinary kind of team.
Absolutely.
And then is taught. But what's interesting about that? And we talked about this before. You can put it out there, but it don't mean they're going to teach it.
Not unless we, enforce it like all the other things we insist to be taught. And you know what? Since you're talking about that, I'm not a fan of academic testing and the way they do it, but I would certainly be a fan of having testing on this on the issues like humanity and how we treat each other, and knowing if we have now shared this with our children, because I really do believe that's the issue, Dr. Miles. We are not teaching our children to respect humanity.
Well, my question is, I think you're asking too much. I think that parents already know that. So why waste taxpayer dollars to do that? Well, of course, I'm being cynical. I think that's what the greater community is going to say. Why would you do that? But they can say why we don't need to do that based upon their experiences and based upon their frame of references.
Yes.
Because, and talking to white friends that I have, they're not aware of our struggles. They really are not. They're not aware of, the stuff that we go through. Like, why are you so nervous when you drive? Okay, well, I get stopped.
I mean,
it's different than you getting stopped.
Is George Floyd not clear? I mean, a man was killed on the street in broad daylight by someone who clearly had no value for his humanity. What more needs to be said?
But my question in that is that even with those kinds of examples, how is that even explained to children?
Well, here's the thing. What it explains to children is that certain people did not have value, certain lives, right? Because they're seeing it over and over. So again, if we're not proactive about having conversations, and that is one of the strategies when we talk about ways to help children deal with race, we must have those conversations. You can't just say, maybe it's too complicated for the child and let it bypass. You need to find a way to say, you know what, this was wrong. That shouldn't have happened. And
Well,
so if you know what I'm saying, we have to have the conversations.
well, I think of what you and I were saying with Valiant, we'd be rich. I guess we're just having the conversation because the bottom line on this is that even with George Floyd, I mean, the answer is that, oh, guess what? He did something bad, so he was arrested. It wasn't supposed to happen and was killed. Versus, it's just outright racism. So I'm thinking again that it really is who tells the story. Who tells the story? And I think what you're saying is that there should be some common core on racism and equality and humanitarianism.
Absolutely.
Some core, because that's what's really missing, the core. And the core is, how do you get it to be core? And I think
raising simple questions like,
mm-hmm.
Is race real? I mean, Can we have a dialogue? Is race real in the biological sense? And there are both grade level activities as
mm-hmm.
well as adult level activities. There was an Oprah Winfrey show where they divided people based on eye color and immediately taught discrimination. And I've seen teachers have similar examples in the classroom. So we can teach that you're discriminating based on an arbitrary factor. And skin tone is an arbitrary factor, is what we're saying.
But what's interesting about what we're talking about, and we're talking about somebody getting together, I can share with you, there's already been much work done on this. And I should have quoted the source of some of this information. Yeah, I ain't plagiarized. I should have quoted the source because it was a great source. It actually has curriculum for all grade levels on how to deal with race, But guess what? A university has it. They even went as far as talking about how to make it core compliant. Mm-hmm. And whether it was life sciences, earth science, all that kind of stuff. Are you with me? They went through all of that. But I can assure you, it's probably still sitting on a shelf.
Yes. And I know for a fact in several school districts that is the case. Mm-hmm. I've seen, that we've had let's call them encyclopedias or big mm-hmm. manuals put together on, African American diversity and inclusion sitting on the shelf in the libraries. Teachers aren't using it. Teachers haven't been trained on it. So the students aren't getting it. Most states now have a requirement that you teach quote unquote African American history, although the issue of racism and discrimination goes far beyond just African American history. Mm-hmm. But it's in a book somewhere, it's mandated, but you won't see it on any evaluation form, to say that we are enforcing and that we are serious and that this is something we value in our education system. So that's how we're teaching our children these messages. They notice these things. You can't go to school for 12 years and know that, you've learned about 5 people of color, and yet, you've been taught about, other people for 12 years.
One other thing about it is when we look at this issue of race, it's not just really about black and white. It's about anybody who's different. We're talking about what's the color of racism. A race, are we more alike than different? And how do we teach our children this? Let's deal with stereotypes.
Okay.
And when we start talking about stereotypes, and I'm going to call it not just stereotypes, I'm going to call it propaganda.
Okay. Because what it is.
Because the stereotypes of propaganda actually sets the tone and it's the foundation for a lot of racism. Mm-hmm. What is it that black people do? And it's according to who's describing them. What is it that Indians do? It's according to who describes them. What do Latinos or Hispanics do? It's according to who is defining and describing them.
Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of other questions that go with that. Why do some stereotypes continue to resonate more broadly than others? Things that we certainly felt like could have been left behind decades ago. And then you have since these groups were not met who were considered white during this mm-hmm. period of U.S. history. Do stereotypes exist today about different racial groups in the U.S.? We know they do. What social factors most influence them? Okay. Now, right. One of the biggest social factors, I believe, is acceptance. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We accept it on certain levels. We deem it okay, when this happens. And then what does this information suggest about the nature of race and racial identity? We are constantly reaffirming this concept, this construct of race, when we know there's really only the human race. bears come in different colors too.
Mm-hmm.
We still call them bears.
Mm-hmm.
You know, dogs, other animals, many things come in different colors, but we don't dissect them accordingly the way we have done to the human race. And Dr. Miles, I want to ask another question, which I know the answer, but then again, not. Do you think that this concept is greater in the United States than it is outside of the United States? This
Well,
concept of race.
I think the concept of race exists everywhere. It's the intensity of it. It exists everywhere. I mean, in Europe, they have racism there, but guess what? It's not as intense. And those who live there say, guess what? You know, we use the words covert, right?
Mm-hmm.
Overt and covert. You know,
Right.
overt is, you know, it's in your face.
Right.
Covert is subliminal.
Right.
But
And probably more dangerous,
yes,
actually.
of course. You know, one thing I want to clear up for our listeners is that, you know, and our viewers, we're not here to say one is greater than the other. We're talking about construct. We're talking about how do our children view our actions when it comes to race, color, and discrimination. And we're talking about stereotypes. Stereotypes. I actually, Jackie, and I'm on my college courses, and you may have experienced this in some of your courses also. I would have a multi-ethnic class,
Mm-hmm.
and I would put on one board um, black male, white male, positive and negatives. And my goodness,
The black side.
they could whip off things about black people like this, you know, negatives. But it came to the positives, everybody had to think. With the white male on the negatives, guess what?
Couldn't find any.
Nobody had to think. On the positives, everything.
Loaded.
Rich.
I mean, honestly, you would
Mhm.
think that, and even if you watch the news often, evening news, you would think that, you know, white people never commit crimes. You would think
Mhm.
that there are none ever arrested because the only ones you're going to see on the news are going to flash images of people of color. And
Mhm.
Dr. Miles, this is something I've studied, and I invite our audience to just notice over the
Mhm.
next week. When the image of a black male, or when a black male is spoken of, they say black male.
Mhm.
When the male in a situation is not black, they never mention his race.
Well, that I've seen the same thing, and that's when
And
you're really conscious of what's happening.
right. And also, I invite our audience to notice that when the image of a black male, let's say who may have is accused of committing a crime, is flashed on the screen, it is a close up in your face picture. I mean, almost meant to be, you know, frightening and
To
intimidating.
look dangerous. Mhm.
Mm-hmm. And it's held there for quite some time. I mean, they will cover the whole story with this person's image up. And if it is not a black male, it'll be a flash of a picture, small in the back corner. So we're doing a lot of things subliminally, consciously or otherwise,
Mhm.
or, you know, subconsciously, uh, to promote these negative images and stereotypes.
But you know, I just wish and I hope that, and we're not putting all whites in a basket, and we're not putting all blacks in a basket because we can't speak for all people. But what I hope people get out of this and other conversations throughout the country is a sensitivity to people's struggles.
Which
And
is really all it's about.
yeah,
Being
and not only
sensitive.
that, but you know, it's when I hear language today, I'm sort of like really, Jackie, taken aback by it. I mean, it's like things that happened 50 years ago we're going through, like 50 years ago.
And we've yes, we've regressed.
And
Yeah.
I guess I can't talk too much because, you know, yeah, you've been on me for a long time. I've been talking self-empowerment, those kind of things for 30 years. And here I am now at 63, still talking to Black children about being the best you can be, and don't let your race, and loving yourself, and loving your hair color, your skin texture. You know, it's kind of like, why am I still using the same language I used 30
After,
years
yeah,
ago
30 years ago.
or
Why is there
more?
still a need?
Or more.
Yeah.
And so it's just like we've not, I know we've grown in this country towards people of color and Black folk, but when you look at what is happening now, it seems like, we're back to where we kind of like started from a little bit, except we're more educated now. We got a little bit more power, but the battles are still the same. the
And
battle is still
Dr.
the
Miles,
same.
we have to admit that, the last 4 years have really kind of,
Yeah.
they didn't create it,
Nope.
but it has certainly brought it to the forefront.
It
It has
exposed it.
certainly, yeah, it has exposed and empowered, racist behavior and thinking. So I think that's one of the reasons too. And, being who we are and having the foundation as it is, there's a huge concern over a generation of children who would consider this normal,
Yeah. Hmm.
and in doing so, perhaps become part of that system where, as America is really working to live up to its Constitution and its creed that, all men, all people, all humans are created equal.
Well, what's so amazing about that narrative, Jackie? What's amazing to me about the narrative is that here we are now in 2020 having these kinds of strong conversations when we see 72 million people who followed someone who, in my determination, was racist. Who is
And
racist?
at a minimum, I don't think any one of us could question that the intent was to divide us based on race. Even if they used it, for their own purposes, it was very obvious, very blatant, very overt racial expressions and dividing us along racial lines.
And so we find ourselves now having to even talk stronger to our children, not just about the differences, but about protecting themselves.
Right.
You know,
Literally, just from leaving the house.
yeah, I have never, and thank God I don't have small children because I'm not sure how I will handle this. How I'm saying now, check, I have never thought about in my life of getting a gun. I had never thought about my own protection. But these days, you
Mm-hmm.
just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
If people are going to people's homes and protesting
Right.
with
Their private
weapons,
residences.
with weapons,
Yes.
that
Because
can,
that is the behavior now that we have, or that certain members of our society have reinforced,
yeah,
because it only happens with reinforcement. And of course, you and I have discussed it will take quite a bit of time to send the message and reinforce that that is not the America that we want to be.
well, I
And
think,
with all due respect, Dr. Miles, and I'm sorry, I know I do talk about
go
it,
on.
I really feel like it does an injustice to many non-black and non-black Americans,
Hmm.
to white people. It gives them, a bad name. It fuels this discrimination. But we know that, again, it's not a construct of their race. It is a construct of their mindset and their
Hmm.
thinking.
And the problem is, how we teach our children this. At the end of the day, this is what the issue is, because we're older and we've experienced this and for many years. But the
Mhm.
question is now, how do we teach our children this? And not only does how do we teach them, but what do we teach them?
And there are two things to
Mhm.
teach them. You have to teach them that it exists, and then you have to teach them how to deal with it. Actually, three, and then you have to really work to teach them not to become it.
Exactly.
That is one of the things that Dr. King really worked on encouraging us not to become it.
Hmm. But what's
And
amazing?
we're
I'm
still
sorry. Go
struggling
on.
with it.
Go on. What's amazing to me though is, and you hit up on something, and I hope it doesn't leave my mind because I'm getting older these days. But it's kind of like, where are we in this pendulum? Where are we, and what do we teach our children about this it? And
Yeah.
then do we put all people in the same basket who don't look like us? And
Can't.
it forces us to now take action, because we're dealing with 72 million Americans who feel this way.
Frightening. Frightening.
72 million.
And I
And
think that Dr. Miles, is something that we could really only quantify, in 2020.
yeah,
It is sad, and I think it is shocking. Um, and of course, many of those Americans that we're talking about in that 72 million might still say, hey, I'm not a racist, because again, I think we think it's okay to believe in a double standard and not call ourselves racist.
hmm,
Anyone who supported the nomination of this Supreme Court justice when you also supported that the previous administration could not do it in 9 months, but you allowed the current administration to do it in less than 3 months, 2 months, in fact. That's racism. Like, don't fool yourself. That's a double standard.
Well,
So,
what I did not want to do is get into the politics of it. Like, for instance, the presidential elections. I didn't want to
yes,
go there. I didn't want to go to Supreme Court justices. I didn't
right,
want to go there at all, because I really want to deal with how these trends, how these thoughts, how these feelings, how these stereotypes affect children. And again,
right,
we could tie how it affects children to all of those political things that have happened, because we're talking about generations to come. But
right. And what we're really saying about that is that this is how we're sending messages to our children.
yeah.
This is how we're
And
educating the next generation. Imagine the message to our, you know, let's say 15 to 20-year-olds, 15 to 25-year-olds.
so we asked the question, and I think we've probably already answered that, is how does this misinformation and how does these stereotypes impact or influence how children think?
Right.
I think the answer is it impacts them greatly.
Yeah.
And it influences them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Go on.
So there was another thing that we definitely wanted to cover, and that is ways to deal with it, because you did have some really good research on that. We wanted to talk about that, the different ways to deal with it before we have to go. You know, we did raise a lot of questions, but we want to leave people with some ideas, no matter their culture or their home.
Jack, I think you're talking too much, because can you believe we only have about 7 more minutes?
I know.
I mean, I think you're the one talking too much, not me.
I'm always
not
the one
me.
talking too much.
Right, right. But the ways to deal with it. Parents, feel free to bring the topic up. Don't avoid it. Now I'm going to use my clinical hat now. The first step to treatment is acknowledging that it exists.
Mm.
The first thing to do is to acknowledge that it exists. And then, as you said, Jackie, the treatment is, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with it? Though the treatment and the interventions are, how do you deal with it? Bring the topic up with your children and talk about people looking different. Yeah. What is it about people looking different? Does it mean they're less than or more than? Ours is just the variation, that they're human and they have black skin. And kids would say, their skin ain't black or their skin ain't white. You have to explain to them what you mean by that. What you mean by that. Yes. But you don't say it like they black people. The men are all murderers and rapists, so it's important what you say, but it's also important how you say it. So you have to talk to children about the momentum of looking different, and to be able to talk about the difference between race and human biological variation. That's a lot of words, but what it says is that race means this, but guess what? Human beings, we all got A, B, B type blood, and so forth.
All the same.
Ways to help children deal with race. Also,
I like this next one. I think it's very important.
Mm-hmm.
I think this next one's very important. Creating situations where your child can meet people of diverse backgrounds, religions, and traditions. Okay, you have to be deliberate about that. You want to teach about different religions. You want to expose your children. And even that sounds like a weird word. You got to expose them.
Yeah.
But hopefully, based on who you are, you have a diverse circle.
But what's so interesting, Jack, and I kind of chuckle at this. Maybe I shouldn't chuckle at it. It's kind of amazing that I'm going to introduce children to other people who are different, but they still act just like me. So,
well, that's a good thing.
That doesn't count. No, it doesn't count. I'm saying that you have to get people who have different views and they're able to talk about their views, because it's no sense in having me being white and me get a black person who says, yes, black people ain't no good.
Right.
So
true.
Those guys don't count, people.
Yeah. You really need those who value and appreciate cultural differences, physical differences. It's funny. We don't ever, I don't think, teach children to dislike or discriminate against people with physical differences. Right? Mm-hmm. But we are very comfortable, teaching, again, this construct that the color of your skin makes you different, when it just doesn't. It's a lie. The idea of race is a lie.
And
so we have to look for those teachable moments.
And please, as we're educating our children, please don't say Black people like collard greens and ribs. Don't say that, please. And for blacks who are saying, don't say that white people only eat green stuff. No, it's much deeper than that.
I hope it's not that.
It's well, you'd be surprised. Some people I had to correct them.
All black people eat chicken.
Only they eat chicken. They eat chicken and they like potato pies. All right. So what occurs at while we're on that, it's not a joking matter, but please stop celebrating Black history with ribs and collard greens. That is not.
Stop.
That is not okay. Anyway, I didn't mean to go there. All right.
Stop.
Also acknowledge when discrimination occurs. Parents, when you're out and about and you see something happening, you tell you saw what just happened. That's discrimination.
And talk about it. Yep, that's
discrimination. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And here's another big one. Guess what? Have you talked about your own families?
Yeah. That's where you should start.
I mean, are there families that aren't diverse in one way or another? Because again, you know, discrimination is not just about skin tone or black and white. Do we have families that are really everyone is exactly the same, multi-generational? That would be a surprise. So start in your own families. Well,
you need to start your own families because you'll be surprised when that DNA show up.
I was about to say, I challenge everybody to get that DNA and continue talking. And I mean everyone.
Before you start talking about any race, you better get those DNAs because you'll find out that grandma had blonde hair and our grandma had an afro.
Hello.
All right, so let's make sure we open those things up to our children. And before we can teach our children, Jackie, we have to have an open mind to ourselves. I mean, we have 3 more minutes, but my point is that before we can start teaching them anything, we have to be educated ourselves and be aware of our own biases.
Yes.
Be aware of our own biases.
And there are a lot of different resources to help with that, Dr. Miles. I know there's one called Courageous Conversations About Race, and it really helps you to delve into who you are. But you're right. We have to educate ourselves first, and that's on both sides of this equation.
Right.
Become educated and then educate your children.
You know, we've talked about a lot, and the last thing it says, let's think about this. Is race real in a biological sense? In a social sense? Is race significantly medically? Should certain medicines be marketed to certain races? Does racism influence medical care? And I think many of those answers are going to be yes, because of our construct, because of our makeup. Some medications are not meant for Black people, and some are not meant for white people. And we can't take everything everybody can take. And it has a lot to do with I can hear somebody challenging me. It has nothing to do with race. It has more to do with your genes and biological makeup. Okay,
blood types.
You're right. Okay, you got it.
Of course, we do hear that.
Right. So we're going to say that medicine should be based upon your metaphysical, your DNA and what your body's able to process and absorb. All right, we are really out of time. Jackie, this has been a very fast discussion, and I really I thank our audience who's there. And I got to get off because I don't want our time to go over because I can't post it if it's longer than the 60 minutes. So
as always,
again,
enjoyed it, Dr. Miles.
Next week we'll see y'all. Don't forget to get your information in if you're interested in getting funds for someone who is not having monies to buy toys and food for the holidays. Again, Jackie, it's been great. I'll see you next week. Hey, folk, don't forget about us and love somebody.
Good night, everyone.